How much do you think a championship is worth? Generally speaking, the goal of the sport, the culmination of a player's hard work, grit, and drive, and the representation of the journey the player has went through. How much do you think it's worth? To the average fan, it's a ranking of the player, a metric of their winning ability and success in their profession, the highest form of judgment that a player could achieve. It's very important, so important that this way of thinking and judgment has adopted a nickname throughout sports discussion circles called ring culture, which is the practice of judging an entire player's legacy and quality solely based on how many rings they got. And it's a very easy trap to fall into. With the sole purpose of sports being to win, it's easy as fans to hold the championship or ring count into such high regard. But that line of thinking creates incredibly interesting dynamics when you involve team-oriented achievements. And through a lot of off-season debates and fervent narratives that circle sports, it really raises the question, how much should we value rings throughout sports discourse? With winning being the foundation to any sport ever, it being the main component of the majority of player discourse makes sense, right? You play the sport to win. But when you switch perspective to team sports, things become a lot more complicated. In individual sports, you're completely reliant on yourself, so winning is the only stat to focus on. But team sports require reliance on other people, creating a flaw in judging players solely on their championship track record. The offseason debate of Cam Newton versus Jalen Hurts perfectly encapsulated that for me. A heated discussion made its way around NFL Twitter this summer, questioning who was the superior quarterback between Jalen Hurts and Cam Newton. A debate that really portrays contrasting legacies really well and is a really good jumping off point to reflect on how we value winning legacies in the sport of football and how to judge the weirdest player in the league. I'll end this debate quickly. Cam Newton is better than Jalen Hurts. That's not what this video is about. But the main argument that seemed to prop Jalen Hurts up was his most recent Super Bowl ring he won in February 2025 compared to Cam Newton's 0. The main gripe against Hurts, though, is the talent that he had to support it. A borderline super team that included the best offensive line in the league, 2 elite wide receivers, a high-end tight end, and 2,000-yard rusher Saquon Barkley. Which doesn't only give perspective to his, but every other quarterback's legacy. Like Cam Newton, for example. In his 2015 Super Bowl run, his receivers consisted of Ted Ginn and Devin Funchess. In the Super Bowl, he had to face Hall of Fame edge rushers DeMarcus Ware and prime Von Miller, with 2 honestly below average tackles as his protection. Cam Newton is someone who represents the uber talented and electrifying side, along with the lack of winning. While Hurts is someone who may not have done a carry job that Newton has, but by obtaining a ring, he has something tangible that he could point to that's a representation of his career. The tangibility of a ring, a championship, the ultimate form of winning in the eyes of a fan, gives the winner an edge over other players who don't have that. That's the advantage that a championship ring gives. But that's not exactly ring culture. Even though winning the championship is the purpose of the sport, and the amount of rings you obtain is a direct representation of if you're able to accomplish that, from statistics to awards, there's a lot of other ways to gauge the quality of a player. From all-league teams, all-star, all-pro nods, or even base stats, a general quality of their play is gauged. Like for Cade Cunningham and Jalen Brunson, for example. Looking at their points, rebounds, assists, and efficiency could directly tell you which player is better. If you look at accolades like All-League, MVP, and Pro Bowls, you can measure the tiers these players are already in. Even though championship counts are intrinsic for determining a fundamental metric, they don't determine the tier of a player. Because again, a lot of sports are team efforts. Ring culture changes the perspective of all these players across all sports. The special thing about it is that it's a legacy building attribute that makes their entire career look better, because winning is the purpose of the sport. The rings almost seem to give their career purpose. Look at Tim Duncan, legend, widely considered one of the greatest players in his generation, driver of the dynasty Spurs. He only averaged over 25 points one time in his career. Despite that fact though, his rings validate the supposed underwhelming performance because, well, he won. He did what was necessary for victory. The lack of counting stats shouldn't matter because he fulfilled his purpose as a basketball player. That overlapping ideal follows throughout sports media in its entirety, and is the reason for why some people would think Jalen Hurts surpassed Cam Newton. Because even though statistically Jalen Hurts has never reached peak Cam Newton, his career is justified through the Super Bowl ring he won in 2024. The ring justifies the gap that they may or may not have, or at least that's what they say. Keep Keep that in mind, because I'm going to get to that later. Right now, I want to talk about the tragedy of Cam Newton. He came into the league like a force of nature, an MVP caliber quarterback built differently from everyone else. We saw running quarterbacks before, Vic, McNabb, others, but in his prime, Cam wasn't just a quarterback. He was the entire offense. He carried teams with his legs, his arm, and pure willpower, redefining what a mobile quarterback could be before the league fully embraced it. And then 2015 happened. The perfect season, the MVP, the Super Bowl run. It was supposed to be a beginning of a legacy, the coronation. 15-1 season, trekking through the entire NFL with absolutely nothing but willpower in his two legs. This was supposed to be the start of his journey, but instead, it was the closest he would ever get. Cam Newton's downfall wasn't one moment. It was slow, brutal, and almost inevitable. The 15-1 dominance wasn't sustainable for the Panthers. They fell apart and the heights of their electricity flashed out quick. Carolina was never built like a dynasty. They didn't surround Cam Newton with endless elite weapons or stability. Their success was built on Cam carrying more than any quarterback should ever have to carry. So, when his body finally started breaking down, the team broke down with him. They fell from 15-1 to 6-10. They did end up crawling back to 11-5 for one last breath of relevance, but then the hits and load that Cam took began to add up. You don't get to play like Superman Cam forever. His career slammed shut in week 10 of the 2018 season. It was a routine play against the Steelers, a simple drop back. Then, TJ Watt came screaming off the edge untouched, with that speed and violence that makes it feel unfair. He crushes into Cam Newton's shoulder with a violent crunch and destroyed his throwing arm. The injury was essentially a worsening of his ongoing shoulder damage, specifically a rotator cuff / throwing shoulder injury that Carolina later described as a soreness and structural deterioration. Cam had already injured the shoulder back in 2016, a partially torn rotator cuff, but after that Watt hit, it flared up again badly. His deep throws disappeared. His mechanics changed to compensate. By late 2018, he couldn't even drive the ball downfield. In 2019, the Panthers shut him down and surgery followed. That injury destroyed his passing mechanics and made it impossible for him to be the same passer. The Panthers were 6-2, coming off an 11-5 season, fighting for the number 1 seed in the NFC. They had officially made their comeback after the Super Bowl hangover from that 15-1 season. That hit from TJ Watt destroyed Cam Newton's shoulder and squandered all of that talent he had. Cam Newton's storybook in the NFL was over, and despite the smiles and the cheerful moments and the peaks that he reached, his career was over without a ring. And if we look at the ring culture handbook, it was over without purpose. Despite the talent, despite the dominance, despite the good times, Cam Newton has the same amount of rings than me and you. But what if he was on the Eagles? What if Cam didn't spend his time throwing to Ted Ginn and Devin Funchess? What if instead he walked out into the league's most quarterback-friendly situation? The best offensive line in football, a backfield that could actually control the game, 2-star receivers who win instantly off the snap, and a defense good enough to keep every Sunday within reach. Jalen Hurts can't do close to what Cam Newton did in 2015. He hasn't shown the ability to manufacture wins off of solely his ability, with subpar receivers, offensive linemen, and help in general. He hasn't individually provided what Cam Newton has provided consistently in his career. He hasn't done close to as much with the weapons that Cam has provided. There is nothing along the path of Jalen Hurts' career that shows that he could do what Cam did at his peak. But that ring, it makes you think a little bit more. When looking back at the player, that jewelry on his finger tells the full and complete story. It is unequivocal proof that that player stood at the top of the NFL mountain and achieved all there is to achieve. You don't see anything about the help they have or how good the organization that drafted them was. While that may circle active conversation, in retrospect, it has no impact on how people determine your legacy, unless something peculiar happens. But we'll get to that later. First, I gotta ask a question. Raise a hypothetical, if you will. What if Tim Duncan got drafted by the Charlotte Bobcats? How will he be remembered? I mean, will he be remembered? 21 points per game, 23 points per game, 22 points per game, 25 points per game, 23 points per game, 22 points per game, 20 points per game, 18 points per game, 20 points per game, 19 points per game, 19 points per game, 18 points per game, 13 points per game, 15 points per game, 14 points per game, 8 points per game. These stats, will they mark him as an all-time great? Will they even mark him in NBA history? Like, at all? In current NBA debates, individualistic achievements are the center of discussion, usually based statistics along along with a ranked-based system, you see base stats like points, rebounds, assists, efficiency metrics used to determine who the top 5 point guards in the league are, or the top 10 players, or the top 10 quarterbacks. But when the scope widens and legacy talks get into play, totality stats like rings enter into play. Do you remember who was ranked top 10 in the league consensus-wise in 2006, or even who was ranked there in 2015? Shit, even 2020. As time passes, the more detailed aspects of player discourse is forgotten, and the analysis shifts to the most important accolade in sports: rings. But as important as they are, they're unreliable. The reason ring culture exists is because rings are the most important thing in the sport. Well, to the players playing the sport. To the players, it's what's sought after. It's the reason they play. But it's not the best metric when determining who's the better player. So when that importance to the players naturally transfers to the fandom and weaves their way into discourse, it creates a disproportionate valuation of championship winnings inside their circle of sports discourse. Now, fans don't think inferior players are better than others solely based off of ring count. Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, and shoot, even Eli Manning aren't considered better than a guy like Dan Marino because of their ring count. Robert Horry, Sam Jones, and Frank Robinson aren't considered over a guy like James Harden just because they all have like 10 rings and he doesn't have a single one. That's not ring culture across sports fandom. It's a little bit more deep-rooted than that. One aspect I haven't brought up so far is the human aspect of things. Fans are smart enough to distinguish the complexities of different professional athletes and not hinge their entire opinion on ring count. But as massive as the athletes are in shaping ring culture, human nature from the fandom is as well. While it's true that some people may overvalue rings, it's not because they're inherently stupid and don't know the complexities of the sport. It's more so that they don't care. Let me explain. As time passes and most aspects of the game fade away, the fact of a player being an NBA champion is the only constant, the only thing that sticks, the tool that immortalizes you as a player. Most people don't really dig past it. The problem with ring culture isn't really overvaluation or the hyper-focus. I mean, those suck too. It's more so for something so fragile, it absolutely sets a permanent standard, marking, and label on a player. If it weren't for an onside kick in 2014, Aaron Rodgers isn't looked as some single Super Bowl fraud. Maybe with some better injury luck in 2018, Chris Paul and James Harden, two all-time great players, win a singular ring and etch their names into NBA history. Very tiny tweaks, most of the time outside of players' control, could completely change the perception of them permanently. Not a consistent judgment of their ability, not an overarching look at their career, but minuscule isolated moments, usually not their fault, that could siphon their legacy away, and not a soul will remember these moments. The fragility, permanence, and erasure of that fragility makes ring culture the silent killer of talented legacies across the entirety of sports media, and not a single soul seems to care. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.